Have you ever felt this? Even though you believe you are doing everything right, life suddenly twists course and pulls you into currents you never chose. The tighter you try to hold on to everything, plans, people, outcomes, the future, the more it slips through your fingers like sand. The most frightening thing is not the upheaval itself. The most frightening moment is when you realize there are things in life that do not obey your will, no matter how strong you are, how intelligent you are, or how hard you try. And then you ask yourself, so what am I supposed to do now? Why does the more I try to control, the more anxious I become? Carl Jung had an answer completely different from everything you were ever taught. He believed that anxiety is not the enemy. Anxiety is a signal, a gentle reminder from life that you are trying to control something that was never meant to be controlled. Like a door quietly trembling to let you know you are standing on the wrong side. This video does not come to tell you that you need to be stronger, need to control better, or need to try a little harder. It comes to bring you back to a truth Jung saw with absolute clarity. You cannot control life, and the effort to control it is precisely the source of anxiety. Are you ready to step into this journey? Number 1. The power of those who know how to surrender to life. There is a simple yet haunting question that follows many people their entire lives. Why is it that the more I try to control life, the more anxious, exhausted, and powerless I feel? Carl Jung answered this question with a truth that is hard to swallow. You cannot control life, and it is precisely this effort to control that lies at the deepest root of suffering. You cannot control life. Stop worrying. Not as a comforting piece of advice, but as an exact psychological directive. According to Jung, suffering does not come from circumstances, but from the ego's resistance to what exceeds its capacity to understand and control. The ego always wants life to move in a straight line, according to plan, on schedule, aligned with expectations. But life does not operate by that logic. It moves through cycles, detours, and invisible forces that reason cannot grasp. When the ego tries to take the wheel, it forces life to submit to its will. And when life does not comply, anxiety appears, not because you are weak, but because you are fighting something that cannot be controlled. Jung once said with chilling precision, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." The more the ego resists, the tighter reality constricts. The more you try to control, the more reason anxiety has to exist. Here, Jung speaks of a concept that is often misunderstood. Surrender. Surrender is not giving up, not saying, whatever happens, happens. Surrender, in the Jungian sense, is entering a different mode of being, where the ego no longer sits in the central seat. Those who know how to surrender are not weak. They simply no longer allow the ego to control the entirety of life. They do not turn what I want into the supreme law. Instead, they listen to subtler movements of life and of themselves. Imagine someone gripping the steering wheel during a storm. They clamp down so hard their hands go numb, eyes wide with fear of veering off course. Meanwhile, the one who knows how to surrender does not let go of the wheel, but relaxes their grip. They allow the vessel to move with the waves, adjusting gradually instead of fighting the entire ocean. Surrender is not losing agency. It is shifting from force to cooperation with life. The difference between give up and surrender lies here. Giving up is an act of despair. You quit because you have no strength left, no hope remaining. Surrender is an act of awareness. You recognize the limits of the ego and allow a greater order to guide you. Those who give up withdraw from life. Those who surrender enter life more deeply, but with a different quality of presence. There is a familiar story Jung saw repeated again and again in therapy. A person tries to force their career along an ideal straight path. Study the right major, work at the right company, advance at the right time. Every unexpected turn is labeled a mistake. Every slowdown is considered failure. That person lives in constant anxiety because life keeps deviating from the plan until they become exhausted and are forced to stop. With no strength left to control, they begin doing what they once avoided, listening. And it is precisely in those detours that they find work more aligned with their nature, meet people more resonant with their soul. What seemed like deviation turns out to be the real path. When you stop trying to control everything, this does not make life easier on the surface, but it makes life lighter on the inside. You still act, still choose, still take responsibility. The only difference is that you no longer carry the illusion that you must control every outcome. And when that illusion dissolves, anxiety dissolves with it. If you are in a phase where every attempt to control only leaves you more exhausted, perhaps that is not a sign that you need to try harder, but a sign that you need to surrender in the right way. Not to give up, but to move into a more mature mode of being, where you cooperate with life instead of fighting it. And if these words resonate with you, pause for a few seconds, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, what in my life is asking for surrender, not more control? If that question leaves you silent, let the silence guide you into the next part of the journey. And if you wish to go deeper, stay, because this is only the first door. Number 2, when you stop resisting the flow. There is a very subtle moment that follows right after you stop believing you can control life, the moment you begin to realize just how fiercely you have been resisting the flow. Not through dramatic actions, but through constant low-grade anxiety, inattention, and the feeling that you must always do something so things do not slip away. If the previous part was the ego releasing the wheel, this part is the realization that swimming against the current is what has been exhausting you. In Jungian psychology, life is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous flow of libido, life energy. Libido is not merely biological or sexual energy. For Jung, it is the force that animates the entire psychological life. Desire, intuition, development, and even necessary crises. This energy is always moving, always seeking expression. When you live in alignment with it, life feels fluid, even when it is not easy. When you resist it, the energy does not disappear, it becomes blocked. And anxiety is the signal of that blockage. Many people assume anxiety comes from circumstances, work, money, relationships, an uncertain future. But Jung looked deeper. He saw anxiety as an inner tension that arises when a person tries to remain still while the current of life has already changed direction. You cling to an old version of yourself, a familiar path, a plan that once gave you safety. But the libido has withdrawn. Life energy no longer flows that way, and instead of moving with it, you resist. The more you resist, the stronger the current becomes. The more you tense, the more exhausted you grow. Jung once wrote a sentence that is simple, yet devastatingly accurate. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. When you do not allow yourself to pass through natural change, the necessary pain of letting go, of not knowing, of restructuring, anxiety emerges as a kind of false pain. It does not move you forward, but it does not let you stand still either. It keeps you trapped mid-current. I once heard the story of Anna, 32, a brand manager in New York. For years, she believed she was living the career dream. But over the past year, every time she entered the office, her body reacted with resistance. Tight chest, heavy breathing, mental fatigue. She tried exercising, meditating, reading self-help to control her anxiety, but the harder she tried, the tighter it became. Only when one morning she stared blankly at her screen, unable to begin work, did Anna admit the truth. Her life energy had left this place. The libido had shifted, but responsibility and an ambitious ego kept her there. When she allowed herself to resign and step into a phase of not knowing what comes next, the anxiety faded with startling speed, not because every problem was solved, but because she had stopped resisting the flow that was already carrying her elsewhere. There is a Jungian concept, rarely noticed, but crucial here. Confluence, the merging of streams. It describes a state where the conscious ego no longer separates itself from the movement of the unconscious and reality. You no longer impose personal will on everything, nor do you collapse into passivity. You participate in the flow, listen to it, adjust with it. In this state, life does not need to be controlled. It reveals its intention on its own. Imagine someone standing in a river. When the current intensifies, the instinctive reaction is to struggle, resist, try to remain fixed in place. But the more you struggle, the more your footing slips, the stronger the pull becomes. The one who understands the river relaxes the body, tilts with the current, and allows the water to support them. They do not let the river decide everything, but they do not fight it either. Life works the same way. Often what makes you sink is not the event itself, but how you resist it. The core message here is simple, though the ego hates it. Resist less. Many things will adjust themselves. Not everything in life needs to be solved through action. Some phases only ask that you stop swimming upstream. Stop forcing answers to appear. Stop demanding that you be okay in the old way. When you do, the flow of life begins to do its work, slowly, quietly, but precisely. And you may notice something unexpected. When you stop bracing against the current, life suddenly feels more spacious, easier to breathe, as if an inner door has cracked open. This is not a miracle, but the moment you return to your own natural rhythm. In that moment, peace does not need to be sought. It finds you. If you have ever experienced a moment like a river changing course, where you loosened your grip just slightly and life became lighter, wider, easier to breathe, share that story in the comments. Perhaps your experience will be a small light for someone still struggling midstream, unaware that all they need to do is relax and let the water carry them. Number 3. Letting go as the unconscious's self-healing process. And when you begin to sense the natural breathing rhythm of life, a rhythm that does not require forced effort, you arrive at a deeper layer Jung described as the unconscious's self-healing process. Here, letting go is no longer something you consciously do, but something that unfolds from within, like a silent, self-regulating mechanism, protecting you from what has already completed its role in your life. Jung believed the unconscious always seeks to return a person to inner balance, and one of its most subtle methods is withdrawing energy from what no longer fits. When a job has fulfilled its purpose, when a relationship has taught you its lesson, when a version of yourself has reached its final limit, the unconscious begins to reclaim the libido that once nourished it. No noise, no announcements, no warnings. It simply withdraws, like light leaving a room at the end of the day. The ego never accepts this. The ego sees diminishing energy and interprets it as failure. The ego feels emptiness and concludes it is loss. But the unconscious is doing exactly what it must, restructuring you. Jung once said, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." What you perceive as an ending is sometimes the unconscious pushing you away from what has finished its task, so you can move closer to what truly matches your nature. A forest can only regenerate when fallen leaves and depleted trunks return to the soil. Nature does not cling to what has completed its function. It allows it to decompose, preparing the ground for new growth. Humans do the opposite. When the unconscious withdraws energy from something in our lives, the ego panics and calls it loss. But falling away is not to end. It is to be reborn. I once witnessed a clear example. My friend Claire was in a relationship that appeared stable for 4 years. No fights, no betrayal, no crisis. Yet over the past year, whenever she was with her boyfriend, she felt an emptiness she could not explain. Conversations that once connected them now sounded hollow. Evenings together no longer felt safe, only leaving a quiet fatigue she could not understand. She told herself it was just a phase, tried harder, loved harder, tried to reignite feelings. But the more she tried, the more exhausted she became. Until one night, sitting in silence over dinner, she suddenly saw the truth clearly and gently. Her life energy had left the relationship. Not because anyone was wrong, but because the relationship had completed its task. The libido had shifted, but the ego panicked, afraid of loss, afraid of wasting 4 years, afraid of stepping into emptiness. Only when she let go did peace return. Not because sadness vanished, but because she stopped resisting a restructuring process the unconscious had begun long ago. This is also vividly portrayed in Greek mythology through the story of Persephone. When she was taken into the underworld, the world above fell into winter. Life seemed withdrawn, empty, cold. But winter was not punishment. It was a natural cycle of transformation. Persephone returned each spring carrying new vitality, new growth, the greens that winter had prepared the ground for. Because she had to leave, the world could be reborn. Letting go at its deepest level is making space for a new spring in your life, even when the ego sees only winter. And the strange thing is, the unconscious is never wrong. It only withdraws energy from what no longer supports your growth. But the ego interprets that withdrawal as collapse. The ego clings to old habits, old jobs, old relationships, hoping that a little more effort will bring everything back as it was. But what has completed its role never comes back. It only waits for you to acknowledge the truth so healing can proceed. The message at this level is clear. You are not losing something, you are being renewed. Every time the unconscious withdraws energy from something, it opens the door to another life cycle waiting for you. And when you have the courage to let go at the right moment, you will see that what seemed like winter was only the beginning of a spring the unconscious prepared long ago. Number 4. Every fear is an invitation from the shadow. There is something you will realize once you understand that the unconscious is always restructuring you with subtle precision. What you call fear does not come from the future at all. It emerges from a very different place, what Jung called the shadow, the soul's hidden side. And when you stop resisting the flow, when you begin to see that life energy knows exactly where it needs to go, you will also sense a deeper truth. Every worry you believe is aimed forward is actually pulling you back toward unseen parts within. In Jung's language, the shadow is not evil. It is what you do not want to look at. Repressed insecurities, avoided memories, wounds that once made you shrink, judgments you direct at yourself but have never named. These do not disappear when ignored. They simply operate backstage, directing emotions, reactions, and the persistent anxieties of life. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Avoiding the shadow does not erase it. It makes you live as though an invisible force is steering your life through frightening paths you do not understand. What makes you anxious is not the vague future. The future itself is not inherently threatening. What makes you tremble are unhealed parts of the past. A person afraid of failure is not truly afraid of failing, but of the shame once embedded in their body during childhood. A person afraid of abandonment is not afraid of separation, but of the emptiness born of years without emotional safety. A person afraid to begin something new is not afraid of the new, but of retouching childhood helplessness. Anxiety is the shadow speaking in the language of the future about things that belong to the past. Modern neuroscience describes a similar phenomenon. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, cannot distinguish between a real present threat and a threatening memory from the past. When an unprocessed memory is triggered, the amygdala reacts as if danger is happening now. That is why you tremble in harmless situations, why you worry about scenarios that have not occurred. The body reacts to the past, while the mind believes it is a signal from the future. Neuroscience calls this emotional memory reactivation, and Jung called it the shadow knocking at the door. I once heard the story of a woman named Elena in Toronto. She consistently avoided promotions, even though colleagues and supervisors encouraged her to take on higher roles. Whenever the topic arose, her body immediately contracted, hands sweating, throat tightening. She said she was afraid of big responsibility, afraid of pressure, afraid she wasn't good enough. But when she began working with an analyst, the truth emerged. The fear was not about work. It was the fear of an 8-year-old child who had been harshly scolded by her father for imperfect grades. The shame of that day, the trembling, the feeling of being a burden, the belief that she was not allowed to fail, had been buried for 20 years. When opportunity knocked, that memory resurfaced and borrowed the voice of the future to say, "Don't do it. You'll ruin everything." Eleanor was not afraid of the position. She was afraid of that wounded child being hurt again. Seen through Jung's lens, anxiety is not the enemy. It is simply the shadow's message. Something in you needs to be seen. When you refuse to look, the shadow projects itself onto the future, making the world ahead seem dangerous. But the future is not dangerous. Only repressed pasts are. What you call anxiety is an invitation inward. The unconscious does not want you to panic. It wants you to look at the part trembling in the dark corner. The message here is clear. Fear is not a closed door blocking your life. It is a gentle, patient invitation from the unconscious. Turn back and see what within you needs healing. When you dare to look, anxiety dissolves. When you dare to name it, darkness lights up. And when the shadow is integrated, the future stops being a place to flee. It becomes a place you can enter with a heart that no longer trembles. If somewhere within you a dark corner is quietly knocking, write the word release in the comments. No explanations, no stories, just one word. Sometimes one word is enough to mark the moment you begin to gently loosen what you have held for too long, and open a path your own soul has been inviting you to walk. Number 5. Entering the silent zone where the self leads the way. There is something else that quietly happens after you understand that fear is only the shadow knocking at the door. Within you, a very calm, empty space begins to appear. Not the emptiness of loss, but an open emptiness, a space where the noise of the ego starts to settle, and you realize you are touching a deeper layer of yourself. This is precisely the doorway into this section, the silent zone, where the self speaks. In Jung's thought, the self is the invisible coordinating center of the entire inner life, a form of inner intelligence that knows exactly who you are, where you are going, what fits you, and what has reached the time to leave. The self is not loud, does not give orders, does not compete for power with the ego. It only whispers. And precisely because the self whispers, most of us cannot hear it. The ego lives on noise. Must do, must try, must prove. The self is the opposite. It appears only when you are quiet enough to listen. In anxiety, the ego shouts. But when you enter stillness, the self begins to speak. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Anxiety arises when you look too much outward, toward worst-case scenarios, toward what lies beyond your reach. Peace appears when you look inward, toward the silent movements of the inner world, where the self is still adjusting your life in ways you cannot control. The anxious person believes they must take control to be safe. The one who enters stillness realizes that nothing needs to be controlled at all to remain on the right path. A very simple image for this is a lake after a storm. When the wind is still blowing, the surface is full of waves and reflects nothing. But when the wind stops, the lake begins to reflect the entire sky. The lake itself does not need to do anything. It only needs to stop being disturbed. Your mind is the same. When the ego keeps creating noise, you cannot see the path. When the mind becomes quiet, the path reveals itself. In a Jungian therapy session, I once heard the story of a man named Julian. After a prolonged period of tension in his marriage, he fell into such intense anxiety that he could not escape it on his own. He tried everything, reading self-help books, listening to podcasts, going to the gym, practicing fast meditation, watching motivational videos, even searching for answers in dozens of pieces of advice online. But the more he tried to fix things, the more chaotic his mind became. One day, his close friend told him to do just one thing, fix nothing at all. Simply sit still for 10 minutes every morning and observe the breath. No analysis, no expectations. The first 3 days, he felt even more unsettled. But by the 5th day, he discovered a new layer of stillness beneath the noise. It did not judge, did not give advice. It only gave him a very gentle sense that, I know where I'm going, even though his rational mind did not yet understand. A week later, he said the anxiety had dissolved like mist. Not because the problems disappeared, but because he had heard the whisper of the self again, the very thing he had lost amid the noise of responsibility and expectation. What Jung wanted us to understand is this. The self does not need you to act in order to speak. It needs you to stop, not to keep fixing everything, not to force the present to be different, not to rush to fill the empty space with solutions or logic. When you become quiet, the self begins to guide you through very subtle signals, a sense of rightness, a gentle clarity, a fleeting intuition, an unexpected decision that nonetheless brings peace. The ego wants reasons. The self only needs silence to do its work. Neuroscience also offers a similar perspective. When the brain enters a state of calm, especially through slow, deep breathing, the prefrontal cortex, the center of clarity and decision-making, becomes activated, while the amygdala, the center of fear, reduces its activity. Stillness is not only a spiritual state, it is a biological action that allows the brain to shift from reaction to awareness, from panic to understanding. What Jung called the self is precisely the part of us that can function only when the noise of the nervous system quiets down. If you want to try, begin with the simplest exercise. Observe the breath without controlling it. Observe thoughts without assigning meaning. Observe emotions without trying to fix them. When you step back and simply observe, the ego loses its grip. The self moves to the foreground. The final message is very gentle but also very real. When you are silent, the path appears on its own. No forcing, no striving, no worrying. Because what guides you is not a frightened rational mind, but the self, the deepest part of you, the part that knows the direction even when you cannot yet name it. And precisely when you begin to listen to the whisper of the self in that silent zone, you will realize an even deeper truth. Not everything that falls apart in life is a mistake. Some things we call failure are simply the secret language life uses to rearrange the path. Number 6. The hidden order operating behind every failure. Life never arranges things randomly. Even chaos has its structure. This sounds gentle, yet it is one of the hardest truths of maturity to accept. Failure is not a period. It is a bracket. And inside that bracket is an entire restructuring process unfolding quietly beneath the surface, whether you notice it or not. Most of us are taught that failure means we are on the wrong path. But in Jungian psychology, failure is often a signal sent up from the unconscious to push you away from a turn that has completed its task.